The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday afternoon, turning Manhattan streets into rivers of grey. Philip Hartman sat in the back of his Mercedes, his hand intertwined with Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers when the traffic light turned red at Fifth Avenue. He was explaining the seating arrangements for their engagement party, only 3 weeks away now, when movement in the crosswalk made his words die in his throat. A woman was crossing the street, struggling with an oversized umbrella while managing a double stroller. The wind caught the umbrella, tilting it back, and for just a moment, Philip saw her face clearly through the rain-streaked window. His entire body went rigid. Rachel Montgomery, the woman he'd loved with everything he had 6 years ago, the woman who had disappeared from his life without explanation, leaving only a brief note that said she needed to find herself and couldn't do it in his world. But it wasn't just Rachel that made his heart stop. It was the 2 children in the stroller, a boy and a girl, perhaps 5 years old, with dark curls that looked startlingly familiar even from this distance. "Philip, are you listening?" Victoria's voice cut through his shock, sharp with the irritation of someone unaccustomed to being ignored. Yes, of course," he managed, but his eyes were still locked on the crosswalk. Rachel had made it to the other side now, disappearing into the crowd of pedestrians seeking shelter from the storm. Victoria followed his gaze, her ice-blue eyes narrowing. "Do you know that woman?" "No," Philip lied, the word tasting bitter. "Just thought I recognized someone." The light changed, and Marcus, his driver, eased the car forward. Philip twisted in his seat, trying to catch another glimpse, but Rachel was gone. Vanished into the city, just as thoroughly as she had vanished from his life 6 years ago. 6 years. The twins looked about 5 years old. The math screamed at him, but he forced himself to turn back to Victoria, to smile, to nod at whatever she was saying about orchids versus roses. His mind, however, was spinning in circles, returning again and again to those dark curls, to the way the little boy had been laughing at something his sister said, to the protective way Rachel had bent over the stroller to shield them from the rain. Victoria Ashford was everything his family had wanted for him: old money, impeccable breeding, connections that would benefit Hartman Industries in ways that went beyond mere business. Their engagement had been as much a merger as a romance, though Philip had convinced himself that respect and compatibility were stronger foundations than passion anyway. Rachel had been passion. Rachel had been the daughter of his family's housekeeper, the girl who'd grown up in the servants' quarters of the Hartman estate. The woman his mother had called entirely inappropriate. Rachel had been poetry and laughter, and dreams bigger than the mansion walls that had separated their worlds. And then she'd left. "The florist needs an answer by Friday," Victoria said, pulling out her phone to show him pictures of elaborate centerpieces. "Mother insists on the white roses, but I think they're too traditional. What do you think?" Philip looked at the images, seeing nothing. "Whatever you prefer." Victoria's expression tightened. She wasn't stupid. She could sense his distraction. "You've been strange all week. If you're having second thoughts—" "I'm not," Philip said quickly, squeezing her hand. "Just a lot on my mind with the Singapore deal." It wasn't entirely a lie. The Singapore expansion had been consuming 18-hour days for months, but it was also not the reason his pulse was racing, not the reason he couldn't stop seeing Rachel's face in his mind. They arrived at Victoria's family estate in Greenwich, just as the storm intensified. The Ashford mansion made even the Hartman estate look modest. 30 rooms of old-world elegance that spoke of wealth accumulated over centuries rather than decades. Philip went through the motions of the afternoon, shaking hands with Victoria's father, accepting congratulations from her mother, touring the gardens where the engagement party would be held. But part of him remained on that rainy crosswalk, replaying those few seconds over and over. Could they be his children? The question burned in his chest, but he had no way to answer it. Rachel had vanished completely after leaving him. He'd tried to find her, had hired investigators who'd turned up nothing. It was as if she'd simply ceased to exist, or as if she'd deliberately hidden herself. "You'll stay for dinner, won't you?" Victoria's mother asked, already leading them toward the dining room, as if his agreement was a foregone conclusion. Philip checked his watch. "Actually, I need to get back to the city. Conference call with Tokyo at 8. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line, but she walked him to the car. "You're being weird, Philip. Don't think I haven't noticed. It's just work stress," he said, kissing her cheek. "I'll make it up to you." But as Marcus drove him back toward Manhattan, Philip pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Hartman," a gruff voice answered. "Didn't expect to hear from you." "Derek, I need you to find someone," Philip said. "Rachel Montgomery. Last known address was Brooklyn 6 years ago. She has twins, a boy and a girl, about 5 years old." There was a pause. Derek Morrison was the best private investigator in New York, discreet and thorough. "This is personal?" "Very. Give me 48 hours. Philip ended the call and stared out at the rain-slicked streets. Somewhere in this city of 8 million people, Rachel was putting those children to bed, maybe reading them stories, maybe explaining why the thunder wasn't something to fear. Were they his? The question consumed him. And if they were, if Rachel had been pregnant when she left, if she'd kept his children from him for 5 years, then everything he thought he knew about that time, about her reasons for leaving, had been a lie. His phone buzzed. "Victoria." "Dinner was lovely. Wish you could have stayed. Mother wants to discuss the prenup next week." The prenup, the engagement party, the wedding set for June at St. Patrick's Cathedral, his future laid out in neat, predictable lines. But those twins had shattered his certainty like a rock through glass. Philip typed a response to Victoria, something non-committal and affectionate, but his mind was already elsewhere. The Mercedes pulled up to his penthouse building on Park Avenue. Philip rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, loosening his tie as he stepped into the apartment that had been featured in Architectural Digest. All clean lines and expensive art, and not a single personal touch that made it feel like home. He poured himself a scotch and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights blurred by rain. Somewhere out there, Rachel was living a life he knew nothing about. Somewhere out there, 2 children who might be his were sleeping in beds he'd never seen, in a home he'd never visited. The not knowing was agony. But in 48 hours, Derek would have answers. In 48 hours, Philip would know if the woman he'd never quite gotten over had left him because she was carrying his children. Children his family would never have accepted. Children that would have complicated the careful plans his parents had for his future. He took a long drink, the scotch burning down his throat. If those twins were his, if Rachel had hidden them from him for 5 years, then his engagement to Victoria was built on a foundation he hadn't even known was false. Because how could he marry another woman when he had children he'd never met?